for now. Thank you all for joining us today. You are joining us during Career Month, which is UChicago Alumni's month-long focus on career preparation, webinars, series of events, panels, meetings, all set up to help you prepare for your career. We know starting off the new year, you could have wanted to make some changes or grow in the work that you're doing. So we are here to help. And today's session is all about that. Today we are excited to present the 5 Ps of DEI with Erin Brown. Erin is an alumna of our MPP program here at UChicago, and is going to lead us in her 5 Ps of DEI. A little bit about Erin before we get started. Like I said, she's earned her MPP here at UChicago. Previously to that, she earned her BA in political science from Loyola University of New Orleans. She is the Deputy Director of the Management Bureau's Office of Management Policy, Budget, and Performance. And before that, she launched the USAID's new Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility agenda. She has started at USAID in 2012 as a Franklin Fellow after 13 years in the private sector, where she led medium and large-scale strategy planning, business process implementation, and organizational change. She is an incredible speaker. I'm really excited for her to get us started. I'm going to very quickly share my screen so you can see her wonderful slides, and we will get started. Erin, I'm going to pass it over to you. If anyone has any comments or questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat as we go along.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Yes, it's a pleasure to be able to speak with all of you for Career Month. I remember my time at University of Chicago fondly and still have great close ties with some of the members of my cohort. And so, it's an honor to be able to present or to speak to you about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, DEIA. For Career Month, in thinking about DEIA, not just thinking about why it is beneficial for us to keep it top of mind for our organizations, but also thinking about why it's good for us to keep it top of mind individually as we navigate our careers, and how us putting DEIA at the forefront helps us to more effectively navigate our careers, which I'm sure all of us are concerned about during this Career Month. And so I'm happy to talk to you about the 5 Ps of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And that is kind of I'm the daughter of an English teacher, and I love alliteration. So it was the easiest way for me to think of how do we keep away from making DEIA something extra to do, and something nice to do, and something that we institutionalize as part of our operations at the United States Agency for International Development. And the 5 Ps are essentially people, policies, practices, programs, and partnerships. And so if we're thinking about DEIA from a people, policies, practices, programs, and partnerships, then we are inherently integrating it into everything it is that we do. And so that, again, that is not something just extra to do. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today about DEIA and USAID, why it's important for us at USAID, and then why it should be important for all of us. So with that, we can go on to the next slide. So I've been at USAID since 2012, and shameless plug for the United States Agency for International Development. There is, to me, not an organization with a better mission in the United States government. When you are working to help improve the resilience of those that are living in extreme poverty all around the world, you know that somehow, some sort of way, everything that you do day to day is making a difference in someone's life. And so I'm actually just going to, for those of you that have never heard of USAID, the field of international development, I thought that I would go ahead and at least provide a very short video. We're big on videos at USAID. Have this short video so you can hear all about USAID. I get jazzed every time I see a video about USAID. And so for those of you that have never known about international development or humanitarian assistance as a field, and you might be interested, then hopefully this actually gave you an idea as to what the US government does and how we support basically the resilience of people all over the world. And always happy, if you're interested after this particular presentation, to email me, and happy to connect you with those in our organization that I help to recruit. So if you can go back, so thank you. So what is USAID? USAID, since I'm talking about it, USAID basically is, we are the lead agency on our international development and humanitarian efforts. So especially when I think about humanitarian assistance, think about the Ebola crisis. Who was the lead agency on the US's response to that? USAID. When you have an earthquake in Nepal, who's responding to that? A typhoon in the Philippines, who's first lines and first response for that? That is USAID. Our Food for Peace program, USAID, not to mention the fact that across at least 12 different sectors, we are helping to promote resiliency in all of our partner countries where we are around the world. And so we actually, as a foreign service agency, we work very closely with the State Department, but we are an independent foreign service agency with a foreign service cadre of our own. We have presence in over 100 countries, but actual missions or formal posts in about 86 countries, and we'll soon have another one in Fiji. And so again, we have programming against 12 different sectors. And so if you're thinking about, hey, let's say I were interested in international development or humanitarian assistance, is there a place for me? Yes. There is nothing that we don't do in the international context at USAID, whether it's someone in the business field that's interested in being a contracting and agreement officer. Those are millions and billions of dollars that we basically are giving out in foreign assistance all around the world, or whether it's being a technical expert from a global health perspective. So we need public health experts, we need economists, we need lawyers, so there are fields. All of these fields are represented at USAID, both from the civil service that we operate out of Washington, D.C., or if you're interested in a career from a foreign service perspective, we also have those backstops with foreign service officers all around the world. So next slide. Okay, and so at USAID, we're a medium-sized, I don't want to say small, so medium-sized but mighty organization with a workforce that's over 10,000, and that workforce of over 10,000, we have everything from what I mentioned. We have civil servants that are in Washington, D.C. So for those of you in the Harris School, if we still have Washington Week and you're looking to interview with different government agencies, don't pass up USAID, especially if you've also thought about the State Department, or if even on the business front, since a lot of what we do is about foreign assistance, and we're actually giving out money through contracts, grants, cooperative agreements. We need those with business savvy. So if you're thinking about it from a civil service side, of those of us in Washington, or you're thinking about becoming a member of the foreign service cadre that are at our missions all around the world, those particular mechanisms exist. But then we also have contract mechanisms. And so you see these cooperating country nationals, third country nationals, and U.S. personal services contractors. That actually makes up the majority of our workforce, to be perfectly honest with you. So the cooperating country nationals, what we used to be known as foreign service nationals, those are the local citizens that are in the countries where we operate that support our various programs in the countries where we serve. We have third country nationals, which are similar to cooperating country nationals, but are actually citizens of other countries that move to actually to take on posts that are in a particular mission. And then we have U.S. personal services contractors. So those U.S. personal services contractors can be used to fill whatever particular need that we may have at an agency. If let's say that we need someone, we're running short on an economist in Zimbabwe, I may be able to do a U.S. personal services contract with someone who will then go out to post. And so U.S. personal services contractors are able to operate both in Washington as well as in our as well as overseas. And then just to kind of give a plug for our CCNs, our cooperating country nationals, they really are the heart and soul of our agency. And we have over 4,000 of them at our various posts. And so there are those of you that are citizens of other countries and you're looking to work at USAID. And let's say that you're going back home or you want to go back home and you wanted to look for an opportunity in international development, there may be opportunities there for you as well. Next slide. All right. So thinking about, we're talking about DEIA, and the reason why, and by the way, I don't expect you to read every word on this slide. This violates everything that I believe about creating decent slides. But the reason why we have every word that, as part of the definition is that at USAID, what we found is, we are a very, we're very technical. We have very highly educated people that work at USAID. And sometimes you can get caught up or spun up in the meaning of words. And so we just wanted to make sure that we're not going to let there being confusion about what we mean when we say diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility to hamper us from actually being able to make solid progress on each of these areas, because they are distinct. And so when we're talking about diversity, of course, we're not talking about just, and I want to make this point here. People get, when people talk diversity, the first thing they go to is racial and ethnic minority. Stop it. That is not the meaning of diversity. Does it mean that there aren't issues around there being underrepresentation in our organizations? Absolutely. Should we focus on that? Absolutely. But what we don't like to hear, and what I personally, when I was running the DEIA program, is to stop making this DEIA a conversation for minorities. This is not a minority conversation. Diversity means difference. We're all different. We all have different identities. So diversity is the same thing for a white male as it is for a Black woman, as it is for one of our beneficiaries that might be in Pakistan, Iraq, whoever it is. The diversity in the people that inhabit the planet is so rich. And that is where we, so that when we talk about DEIA, it's not the minority thing. We all see ourselves in the conversation about diversity, because diversity applies to all of us, okay? So I just wanted to go ahead and make that clear. But when we were talking about DEIA, wanted to get out of especially diversity, get out of talking about just, especially at USAID, about racial and ethnic diversity, but also gender orientation, sexual, gender identity, sexual orientation, geography, veterans versus non-veterans. I mean, the diversity, the variety of identities is endless. And so when we talked about diversity, we cast a wide net. And that's my only point that I want to make to you today. When I think about inclusion, I think about, hey, it's one thing to invite people to the party. It's another thing to include them and make them feel welcome once they get to the party. It's one thing to have people invite people. And I see that there's a lot of energy around recruiting at minority serving institutions, et cetera, when it comes to these various organizations. It's like, so if you are making efforts to diversify the pipeline of qualified candidates, the question is, how are you making them feel included in the conversations, in the decisions that are being made, as opposed to it being a pro forma exercise? But also from an individual level, as we are engaging with our colleagues and we are thinking about, how do we innovate? How do we problem solve? What are these creative solutions that we're supposed to develop? Who is it that's sitting around the table? Who are you inviting to the conversation? Representation matters. That's important, because that's what drives if you have a bunch of people that are sitting around the table and they all have the same backgrounds, you're all going to be thinking of the same solutions. And so you will have blind spots. So the idea is, how do you get around those blind spots? Diversity and inclusion is definitely a way that you can use to get around blind spots, not just within your organizations, but also as you are engaging in personal problem solving, insofar as getting input into how when, where, and what you make decisions. Equity. Would you mind, Natalie, would you mind advancing to the next slide for equity? Because I think this point is really important. People confuse equity and equality all the time. They are not the same. If I don't know, let me see if I can see chat. Just looking at this picture where we try just graphically to depict the difference between equality and equity, can folks just put in the chat what you see as the difference between equality and equity? What's the difference? Anybody? Anybody? Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's exactly right. It's about the focus is on the outcome, not on what is necessary in order to get to the outcome. So with equality, we just want everybody to have the same. But if you look at the picture, they were all given the same thing. But guess what? You still got one that can't see, right? And so in some instances, equality or equal opportunity in and of itself is not enough, because not all are starting from the same place. And what we're trying to get to are folks that are having equal outcomes. And so the equal outcome in this particular image, we want everybody to be able to see. That's all. We want everybody to be able to see and to do so safely. So they're behind the fence. But guess what? This older child, he doesn't need a box. And if he doesn't have a box, that's okay, because he can see, right? Whereas you needed one child that only needed one box and another that needed two. So that person needed a little bit more. But that's okay, because at the end of the day, it didn't increase their ability to have, excessive outcomes. They had the same outcome as everyone else. They just needed a little help. And so when we're thinking about DEIA, we're thinking about not just equal opportunity, but also thinking about equity, right? And so, so I just wanted to go ahead and make that point, because I hear people using them interchangeably all the time, and they're not the same. We really should be focusing on both. And so, Natalie, would you mind going back to the previous slide just one more time, and I'll catch accessibility? Okay. And so in accessibility, we are talking about, and this is a community or a population that gets that too often are forgotten, and those are persons with disabilities and persons with targeted disabilities. And so persons with disabilities, whether they be physical or cognitive. And then persons with targeted disabilities, we're talking about people that are missing limbs, are not able to see, not able to hear, et cetera. So the focus of the US government, whether you realize it or not, the Biden administration has had an extreme focus on all elements of this puzzle. DEIA is the focus of no less than 13, and another one on the way, 13 executive directives from the Biden administration that are focused on not just DEIA in internal organizations, but also having us think about what does that mean for our programs and the services that we deliver to the American people. Okay, so we can go ahead and advance. And one more, thank you. Okay, so great. So, as far as why, it mattered to us. And so our administrator, and of course, while I'm talking to you, I'm speaking, definitely from Erin's point of view. Don't want to represent the opinions of the agency at all. I'm speaking specifically from my point of view. But I will say that I was very impressed by how our administrator, Samantha Power, who when she came on board, and some of you may know Samantha Power. She's, of course, she's been a New York Times bestseller. She was the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. We were so pleased to be able to have Administrator Power come to USAID and help to shine a light on the great work that our agency is doing all around the world. But she is also very clear. So separate from the Biden administration and its focus, she is also very clear on the fact that DEIA is the lens through which we should be doing our work, because DEIA, assists us with all of these things on the slide. When you have the diverse perspectives around the room, especially the perspectives of those who share identities with some of the communities where we do business. I mean, if you don't know much about USAID and where we operate, the majority of our presence is in Africa, and the African diaspora, and then Asia and Europe, and we're also in Europe. We are, when you think about the perspectives that are needed in order to address the complex problems that are faced all around the world by the different people and identities of those people, then you know that you need to have the diversity of people that are around the room in the room, as well as those that are actually taking part in making those decisions. And so we're talking about the better development outcomes. We're talking about the improved or enhanced creativity that drives innovation. We're talking about, hey, avoiding blind spots that lead to risk. Because when you can't see something coming, when you're blinded to something coming, then you are exposing yourself to risk, be it financial, be it legal, be it reputational. So having those diverse perspectives and providing the opportunity for people to be able to engage on those decisions is very important. When we're talking about USAID doing all this work all around the world, what do you think lends credibility with our host country governments, who are run by people that run the gamut insofar as identities? Of course, it is when we have as just a diverse representation in our leadership as they do in theirs. And then lastly, it's important to us because the Biden administration has said that it is. And that's no small thing whatsoever. And we are happy that we have a US president that has prioritized DEIA, both from an internal workforce perspective as well as programs. Next slide, please. Okay, so why should it matter to you? Just throwing it out there, DEIA, and for those of you that are actively paying attention, if you wouldn't mind just dropping in the chat, why do you think DEIA should be important to you? And definitely as you are either starting your career or making career changes or seeking to grow in your career. Yep, better outcomes. Yeah. It does make the workplace a better place. Absolutely. It drives engagement. It drives morale. It drives innovation, esprit de corps, all of those things. Absolutely. People are the most important asset. Absolutely. More potential for being understood and heard. Yep. Yes, we work in a global market. And one day the US frame, the Western frame, may not be the dominant one, right? So I think that, when we think about DEIA, it is how do we embrace it because this is a very personal thing. This is not just about what is the organization doing, because the organization is only a collection of people. So what are we, it starts with us. So what are we as individuals doing to contribute to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility? So thank you all for those ideas. Next slide. Okay. So you came up with, with a lot of them. The problem solving is definitely different when you have the diversity of perspectives around the room. I would like to think, I've been in the game, I guess this is 24 years now. I went to USAID. I came from the private sector. I was a senior principal at the global consulting firm Hay Group, which is now a part of Korn Ferry. I would like to consider myself somewhat of a subject matter expert, but I still don't know everything. And my perspective is definitely informed by the various identities that I hold. And so it just stands to reason. To me, it just makes sense that if you want to think outside the box, you can't think outside the box while you're in the box, right? And so having those people around you that can help you to get those creative juices flowing by helping you see problems in a different way. And that gets to the creativity and innovation. I cannot say enough about how the work that we're doing at USAID. We have an excellent program called Respectful, Inclusive, Safe Environment, or also known as RISE, that is actually, that they're trying to take some elements from that program and actually promulgate it across the US government. That's just how great of a program that has been. And all credit to Keita Salazar-Thompson and the team of people that she's had around her to help to promote it. But when it comes to DEIA, the focus on this is really around how do you strengthen relationships by being inclusive, by taking into account diverse perspectives, by being more equitable, by being considerate, especially of those that may have accessibility concerns, how it builds trust, improves communication. And because it builds that trust, it helps to strengthen the relationships that you have with your colleagues. If you are seen as being a force of empathy, please believe that when it comes to how you are able to progress in your careers, it will make a difference. And I can't speak for any other industries that you may have had experience with, but I can tell you, for those of us in foreign affairs, relationships are your currency. And if you can't, I don't care what results you think that you think that you can achieve. I don't care how smart you think you are. I'm not going to say they don't matter, but if we're going to talk about the tipping the balance towards what can help you have more impact and what can help you advance more in your career, relationships. And when you're in these organizations that have the worldwide footprint, then you would want to be focused on diversity, equity, inclusion. And then all of that, the data shows that in all the studies that have been completed about those organizations that focus on specifically diversity, equity, and inclusion, because I don't know how many are having the focus on accessibility as much as the US government is, but for those that focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, it is proven that those particular organizations tend to have better performance by multiple measures. Next slide. All right, so the 5 Ps, because you're like, Erin, I thought you were going to talk about some Ps. So these are the 5 Ps, right? And so I think that, we could talk all day about everything that USAID is doing, or what other donor organizations like the World Bank or IMF, so we could talk about what they're doing all day. I think what's important is for you to have the framework of the 5 Ps in your minds, because that is what keeps it from being something extra to do. And so when you think about people, policies, practices, programs, and partnerships, that's the heart of any organization's operations, period. And yes, there are some more supporting systems that we have in place. But I mean, if you think people, policies, practices, programs, and partnerships, if you work on integrating in some way, shape, form, or fashion, DEIA across all of them, you would have done probably much more than most in advancing DEIA within your organization, and not just advancing it, but institutionalizing it. And so thinking very quickly, thinking about it from a people perspective, people, we're talking about, hey, what's the pipe, how diverse is the pipeline of people coming into your organization? If you're a hiring manager, have you looked at your position descriptions? Are there things included in your position descriptions that serve as barriers to underrepresented populations? So for example, if I'm a foreign affairs agency, and let's say that I've got a position in Washington, Why would I have, something about the person having international experience? Would it be helpful? Yes. Is it a determining factor as to whether or not they'll be successful? Not really, because that's something that you can learn, right? And so doing things like that and saying, are these things that really are a deal breaker as to whether or not this person will be successful? And if those types of things that serve barriers to underrepresented groups, if those are things that can come out, take them out, right? And then look at whenever you having people apply, that you'll actually see that those that you're able to that will pass, I guess, that first line of review, you'll see that they'll inherently be much more diverse. Also thinking about the fact that sometimes it's not about recruiting. We had gotten to a point, a few years back, where we were seeing at USAID that those that were applying for jobs, we had diverse representation on those who applied for jobs. It was the hiring that was the problem. It wasn't that they weren't qualified. And so also be aware of false narratives. Sometimes the narratives, if you're not looking at the data, will be, oh my goodness, it's so hard for us to be able to find all these diverse identities for our opportunities. Like, is it hard to find qualified candidates, or is it that you're recruiting qualified candidates, they're being proven that they're qualified, and for some reason they're not being hired? That's a different conversation altogether, right? And so we started to shift. Uh-oh. Hello?
Erin, can you still see us?
Yeah, I can't see the slides. I don't know what happened.
Not me.
Okay, I've got a small window. I'll work with it. So thinking about not just who you're recruiting, so making sure that, so for those of us at USAID, that we were going to beyond just the Georgetowns, the Harvards, the Yales of the world, and actually diversifying the schools that we targeted, as well as working through organizations that targeted diverse identities, and making sure that we were recruiting effectively. But even if we recruited and had a diverse pipeline, we also had to ensure that that in our hiring practices, that we were also ensuring that those were that we were providing equal opportunity through our hiring practices as well, and that there wasn't anything that we were doing that were throwing up barriers. For policies and practices, it's about, how are we integrating this? How are we looking at our operational policies and making those necessary changes, as well as when we have to make updates to our policies, how are we doing a check to make sure that we are not inherently throwing up a structural barrier that would impede our diversity, equity, inclusion efforts? I'm going to go really quickly. Programs and your services that you deliver. And so for those of us in the US government, things that we do, not necessarily USAID, but thinking about IRS, in the Department of Treasury, thinking about commerce, everything that from the US government perspective that is done impacts the American people. And so the question is, what regulations do we have on the books that that need to be examined in order to ensure that we haven't thrown up barriers to equity, in any of our programs, and how can, through our programs, more affirmatively address DEIA? And then from a partnerships perspective, who are you partnering with? And so for those of us at USAID, we are in the business of foreign assistance. Again, grants, contracts, cooperative agreements, government to government assistance, et cetera. But the majority of that are acquisition or assistance mechanisms for which we need implementing partners to do the work. And for years, we have noticed that the same companies are the ones that get the business. And so now what you're seeing is a huge effort around localization to ensure that we have more local actors that are actually the ones that are able to successfully get these awards, to be able to advance development outcomes in their own country, as opposed to US-based companies that don't know, that aren't that don't have the primary knowledge around the country context, that they aren't the ones that are the primes that are delivering this foreign assistance, these foreign assistance programs, that we actually have a more locally led development. But then also thinking about it from a US-based partners perspective, and working with small businesses, especially minority-owned firms, women-owned firms, et cetera, such that, again, we have the diversity of perspectives within our partner base, and that there's work that has been done by USAID in order to help with ensuring that we have, or at least facilitating improvement in having a more diverse partner base. Next slide. Okay, so as I was saying earlier, and I wanted to leave a little time for questions, it will take all of us, right? And so this is not just about what we're doing in our organizations or what USAID might be doing, and how can we do that at our organization. It's not really about that. It really is about how do we take personal responsibility for the change that we really seek. And I mean, and it's going to take all of us, right? And so it's a diversity, as I was saying earlier, diversity is not a racial, ethnic minority problem. Diversity is all of us. All the myriad of diverse identities that exist in this world, diversity is all of us. And so all of us inherently should care, because it should matter to all of us. And so that's one. Two, inclusion starts with you. Notice whenever it comes time for you to be engaged in conversations at work, even if it's just noticing who you go to have lunch with, who you've decided that you want to invest the time to build relationships with, and relationships are currency. So who have you decided is worth your time investment in order to build relationships? And then when it comes time to make decisions, if you're a decision maker within your organization, who have you intentionally made sure was around the table, and made sure that their voices were heard? Because what happens is that this is not something that's rocket science. What we lack is intention. That is what we lack, right? And so DEIA is something, and inclusion specifically is something that we have to be intentional about. And that's what gets to my last part, be intentional about the 5 Ps, okay? So are there any questions? And I have no idea if I'll be able to see the chat, because right now I'm only seeing myself.
Sure. Yeah, I will. I'll read them off if there's anything come up, but I have a couple that we had beforehand that I would love to get to. If you have any questions, yeah, please throw them in the chat. We'll get to them. The first one is, I love that you talked about USAID being a medium-sized organization with 10,000, staff members. But for those of us that come from much smaller organizations, what is your advice on kind of creating change and bringing this to a sort of smaller place, some place you may not have like the manpower or the budget or anything to sort of implement a lot of these changes?
So that's a very interesting question. So I would say that I'm not really sure if it matters small or large. I think that there's some kind of fundamental things that need to happen. One, I knew that, especially when I was serving in the Chief Diversity Officer role, if I'm looking at integrating across all of the operations, then who I needed were the owners of those processes or functions. I needed them around the table. I needed them engaged, and I needed for it to be a priority for them. Fortunately, strong leadership from the top that it was expected, period. And that she would be looking to see results. And that's both from our administrator as well as our deputy administrator for management and resources, because it is being asked all the time. And so people really truly only care what they're measured on. And so if you're measured on it, or there's some reasonable expectation that you're going to be held accountable for it, it matters. Because it may not be that people don't care about it. It may be that it just falls down on the priority list. And so as long as the top is keeping it a priority, then it will continue to be a priority for those who are in the organization who can make change happen, right? So that's one. So one is you need the strong leadership from the top. Two, you need the people that own those functions and processes. If you're really trying to integrate into operations, you need them on board, and work and having a unified plan of action that all of you play your part, because everybody can't do everything. So it's like, hey, these are the priorities. These are the manageable chunks that we need for you to do in year 1, in year 2, in year 3, that will help to advance the efforts that we seek to advance. And then 3, it is understanding that if it's not resourced, then nothing will happen, because you can only do so much on volunteer power. Sweat equity will only get you so far. And at a certain point, you need to add resources to it. And so ensuring that in your processes and your strategic planning processes, as well as and if your budget is tied to your strategic plan and performance and all that, then that all of that is included in those conversations, so that you have everything resourced appropriately. And then I think the last thing is celebrate every success, right? Ensure that you're not just putting things on paper that you say in theory somehow, some kind of way at some time are going to happen. Have for us, we call them monitoring and evaluation plans, but you need some indicators. You need success indicators. You need metrics to which you're going to hold yourselves accountable. And don't make it such that everything has to be achieved this year. Spread it out such that it's manageable, and so that you can celebrate the progress that you have over time.
Amazing. And speaking of those tools and processes, what tools and processes have you found most effective in improving DEIA across organizations, especially if you may have some resistant or less than enthusiastic individuals that you're trying to bring on board? Yeah.
Again, I think it's a combination. I can't speak enough about strong leadership support. The reality is that if you don't have a leader that believes in it, then you probably won't be able to do much. And that is just the the reality of it. But that being said, so getting that leadership support and buy-in and pushing, it's not just in their minds they support, it's creating opportunities for them to show visible, active support, putting in their talking points, putting in the speeches, putting it, having their active, visible involvement in different activities that shows that they support, and sending the signal is very important. And because that signal has been sent at our agency, you all of a sudden see operating units that it might not have been a priority for them before, but all of a sudden they're leaders. They're leading in it. And it wasn't anything that they had to be convinced to do, because I think that, at the end of the day, people are people, and people have interest in ensuring that they're seen as being supportive of the whatever leaders in place's agenda, right? Because all that does is reflect well on you. And so I think that when you have that strong signal that goes out, that does a lot more than what you may give it credit for, because that takes the load off from having to go and convince people. It becomes a whole lot easier when the leader has sent a strong signal and is visibly and actively supporting it almost everywhere they go.
Amazing. And what examples have you seen that strike a balance? And there's always kind of, you talked about these sort of top-down approaches of making sure your leaders are really included, but and kind of leading the force. But what examples have you seen that strike a good balance between employee-led efforts, like employee-led affinity groups, employee-led conversations, and initiatives that come from the top? Is there a way or examples of how to strike that balance so it makes sure that everyone is included?
Here's what I love. So when you're in a government agency, it's a bureaucracy. And so advancing change in a bureaucracy is like turning a battleship around in the middle of the ocean. And so top down, getting a signal top down is one thing, but the reality is that at USAID, a lot of the change that we have had has been bottom up. And as they see a groundswell of activity happening across multiple operating units, then all of a sudden those that are the function owners and the process owners, they're like, well, wait a minute, we don't want everybody just doing things their own way. Let's go ahead and let's have some kind of consistency, some sort of standardization. And all of a sudden now you've got institutional change, right? And so what I love about USAID, and all credit to, we have a very strong set of employee resource groups that have helped with increasing that buy-in at the leadership levels, and leadership, not just at the very top, but leaderships of our operating units, of our missions, et cetera. They've done an excellent job in doing that advocacy work. And then because of the signal from the top, then the operating units formed individual DEIA councils. So a number of the Washington bureaus and operating units, as well as missions overseas, they also have DEIA councils where they are actually taking what's coming out of Washington and doing it down or across at wherever they happen to be. And so they're emulating this reproduction is taking what's done in Washington and bringing it to scale in our missions overseas. And it has been great to see the energy. So you basically have top, and when you have the top down, bottom up, and then that's when you have that sweet spot in the middle where it's speeding and actually driving the change that we've always wanted to see.
Amazing. And then if in looking at job postings, you're seeing more DEI in job descriptions, should
Yes.
postings that don't have them be viewed lower and beyond and being noted in that job description? What else we can look for to see if it's being practiced?
Yeah, no, I mean, I wouldn't look unfavorably on it. I think it's when you're interviewing for it, asking where the organization stands on it, and being upfront that, hey, if I get this job, and not only like how important is it to the organization, but what efforts does the organization have ongoing? And hey, I see it's not exactly in the vacancy announcement about this position, but it would be great if somehow in my work plan, I want to prioritize have some activities and some of my performance based on how I contribute to DEIA. And if they say no, then look at them with the side eye.
Sure. So, okay, awesome. So one last question, which is, you talked a lot about how this is this huge team effort, right? From the leaders on down, from every aspect. What is your advice for those of us that maybe aren't in positions where we can be the ones that are making the ground up change? We're not the ones who can implement the policy. We don't have that kind of say yet in our positions, but we still want to do something. How can we be a part of the movement without being able to be the ones to start the policy off?
Well, what I would first do is, who's your sponsor, right? One of the things that when I was in the acting chief diversity officer role, what was so important was that I got to a point where it wasn't me speaking about it, because I'm just the diversity person. But when it's head of the Bureau of Policy Planning and Learning that is responsible for, for promulgating agency policy or foreign assistance policy. If it's, those that are responsible for executing what we call our basically our New Partnership Initiative, where we're actually trying to expand and diversify and have more local actors that are that become our partners. I'm not the one saying it, they're saying it, right? And so I think that you have to also understand that, especially in DEIA, some of it is about politics, right? And so recognizing that you want to do what it is that you want to do, it becomes a whole lot easier if you can find that one champion, one or two, that would be able to speak truth to power and speak also to their peers and help them understand the importance of it as well. And that was something else that was very important at USAID, also having people at those levels that were able to have the conversation, which made it easier for those at the working level to do what they were doing. And so if I would say anything to you, there's got to be at least one that is willing to champion. And I would basically, before you do anything, who is your influential champion that you might be able to help advance your efforts.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Erin. Thank you so much for leading us today. This is a great discussion, and I'm really excited for everyone who's here to be able to take what they've learned back. I'm going to throw Erin's LinkedIn into the chat. She always is posting really great stories about what USAID is doing. And I've really enjoyed following along and reading. Thank you all for joining us today and for joining us during Career Month. We'll have more sessions coming up throughout the month on a variety of topics that I think will be incredibly interesting to all. I am also going to throw a link in the chat to the rest of our Career Month events that you can check out. And as the session ends, there's going to be a survey. I'd love to get some feedback. We use all of your advice and your opinions and your ideas to help us plan all of our content here at UChicago Alumni. And thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.